Hey, everybody. Thanks for downloading this episode of the Agile Wire. Jeff and I will be speaking as part of Startup Week Milwaukee at Centera on November 14th. It'll be an awesome discussion on evidence based management and understanding how to measure business value in organizations. There's lots going on throughout the week, and we encourage you to take a look at startupwi.org to find something near you. In this episode, we talk with a friend and former colleague, Erik Weber. In addition to being a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org and one of the core stewards for the Professional Scrum with User Experience class, he's the product owner at a startup called HealthChampion, building a product focused on helping consumers own their health data. I've been an early user of the product and a huge fan, so getting to hear more about their approach to development was awesome. Unfortunately, my mic died halfway through the interview, but luckily, having an awesome wingman to carry on the interview worked out and we didn't disrupt the flow of the conversation. Anyway, we hope you enjoy the episode.
Welcome to the Agile Wire, where professional Scrum trainers Jeff Boobles and Jeff Molesky discuss Agile topics. Now, here are your hosts, Jeff Boobles and Jeff Molesky.
All right, and we're recording. All right, Jeff, kick us off, man.
All right. So this week we got Erik Weber on the podcast with us. So Erik is also a professional Scrum trainer at Scrum.org, just like Jeff and myself. And you've worked with a number of startups recently, Erik, and you're currently working with HealthChampion, your employee number one. And you're doing some pretty cool things there, establishing a really neat culture. And I've heard some really great stories, and I'm excited to dig into it a little bit more. So one of the things that I've heard you doing some pretty interesting stuff around hiring. Do you want to, dive into what you're actually doing there?
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Jeff and Jeff. This should be fun. I did consulting for a long time, and then a couple years ago, I stopped and went and joined a startup full time. That went pretty well, so I decided to do it again. So I'm at HealthChampion. We're a health tech app company. And we've built this from the ground up. We've built our app with all employees, no outside contractors or anything like that. And I think we have a pretty unique way of thinking about how we hire people and the interview process that we use. So should we hop into that and talk about? You want me to just give an overview of?
Yeah. What are you doing?
Yeah. So the kind of basic tenet that we started off with was that a small group of very talented, mostly like senior level professionals is going to outperform a large group of many, many developers, especially in the early stages of a company, because there's so much other stuff that's going on. And at a startup, everything feels like chaos every day. So having less people that have maybe better process and communication skills, and not only better, more senior talent, coding skills, but people that have done this more than once would probably outperform others. So we started with a core team of 4 or 5 people that we hired, and we kind of hired all at once. So we each had the chance to meet each other before any of us kind of took the leap and hopped on. So there's a lot of coffee meetings and happy hour meetings where we kind of talked over the vision of the company and what we were doing, and whether this was something that would be interesting for this group of 4 or 5 people to join. And that was important because these folks are giving up a career in other places, sometimes coming from larger, more established companies that where the risk of the risk that's present at a startup isn't there, right? Like they're basically guaranteed a job forever. Here at a startup, most startups do fail. So there's a high amount of risk, and I'm asking people to, take this huge step in their career and take this risk with being able to keep a roof over their head and things like that, because this, it is a startup. So we were able to hash it out together for a while, and then everybody decided to join. That's how we created our first core team. Was kind of this group interview process where we asked each other questions. It was not just me hiring the team, but it was them asking me questions and each other questions, and thinking about the right mix of skills. Are we talking to the right people? Things like that.
Cool.
How did you? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jeff.
I was going to say, you talked about the risk that a lot of people were taking on, but like, how do you balance that with the reward, right? Like, why should they take that risk in their careers to go with this startup instead of this well-established company where they know they would have a long-standing future and, their salary would be protected and they'd have all these benefits and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I think we're seeing this more and more, especially in the Midwest. I'm not sure if it's similar in other places, but the Midwest is full of these large established companies. And the vast majority of software folks work for a company that isn't really a software company. They're an insurance company, or they're a bank, or they're a manufacturing facility, or something else. We can have the everybody's a software company discussion at another time, but like these big employers tend not to be the cool techie employers. So I've actually found it really easy to get people excited about a startup. The thought of going to work every day and only being assigned to one product is something that I think a lot of people in the industry yearn for. So there's some kind of just intrinsic rewards for working at a startup. You're only working on one thing. You're only working on one team. There's no timesheets or any of the things that sometimes people get bent out of shape about. There's very little policy and procedure and things like that. Like we get to create all of that from the ground up as early employees. So there's that intrinsic reward. And then the extrinsic reward is, I think it's kind of a myth in the startup world that like the early employees of a startup are making $10 an hour and they're just working for equity, things like that. That's not really true, at least not in any sort of like funded startup, we're building a business sort of way. Sure, there's still people that start companies in the garage and just use sweat equity for a couple of years, but most startups that you would be applying for a job for have money to pay salaries. So while a lot of people that I've recruited were making a lot of money at other fancy jobs and wanted to come here and make less money, there's also people that I've recruited that came here and got a raise. So it works both ways. And then the other extrinsic thing is when you work at a startup, you're most likely getting equity of some sort. The idea of owning something and being in control of your own destiny is intriguing to some people. Some people it's not, but some people it's like, hey, if we put in 3, 5, 10 years here, like that little chunk of equity that I got when I joined could be really worth something. And along the way, I feel like I'm in control. Like I have ownership. I'm in it. I have to show up every day. There's a reason to come to work every day.
And so do you see like engagement just being, just not really an issue? Like so many big companies have problems with employee engagement, but I'm assuming first off, it's a start off. Second off, there's like people have some type of equity, or most people probably do. There's that purpose that you're driving towards. Like it seems like you've got all the things to increase engagement.
Yeah, I don't really see engagement problems at startups that much. I think a lot of it happens maybe when people start scaling, which is another reason that we've tried to keep the team as small as possible and instead hire senior folks and people that have been there and done that before, instead of trying to solve production issues or productivity issues with more people. We're trying to solve it with better process, more communication, people that are just highly skilled. I think engagement is probably a huge problem if you're a software developer and you're working at a bank or an insurance company or something like that. It's hard to feel connected to the product. And here you see it every day, right? Like we ship new features to production every day. There's a new app in the App Store every week. It downloads to your phone. Like you're connected to it all the time.
Yeah, and I was thinking as you were talking through, not just that connection to the product, but also the connection to the customer. I feel when you get into those scaled organizations, there's so many layers between you and an actual customer. And then it's really easy to conflate an end customer with just another team that's consuming something that you're creating, or really just another step in the process.
Yeah.
But I had another question when you were talking earlier about, when you were really standing all of this up. So actually, let me start with a precursor question to that. Do you act as kind of the product owner for the team?
Yeah. So that's interesting. And I think this is probably a unique situation, but I'm a managing partner here, and I'm in charge of product development, soup to nuts. And my skill set is more in product than anything else. So it wouldn't be appropriate for me to act as anything other than product owner. I'd make a really bad developer, although I've learned a little bit in the year working here at a startup. But I would not make a good developer. And I also thought it was important because I am a Scrum trainer, and I think I know how Scrum works pretty well. But I also thought it was important to have somebody that's able to combat me on what I think the right process is. So we also chose, one of those early hires was also a Scrum Master, and somebody that had been through extensive training and held roles as a Scrum Master and done some good stuff. So we have the ability, because we hired in this way where we could knock ideas off of each other and really chat about things. I think one of the cool things is like, yeah, I'm product owner and I'm also kind of the Scrum guy, but I have a Scrum Master that, at least once a week, if not, multiple times a week, tries to change my mind about something that we're doing in the world of our process. And I think except for one thing, he's kind of successfully shown me. Every time he brings something up, he's shown me that, here's what I think the problem is. This is what we're doing now. This is what I think we should do. Let's try it in this way. And except for one thing, he's always convinced me that that'd be a good idea to try. And I think he's been right. It's hard to say in retrospect. Like we don't take a whole lot of time to put together weekly experiments to measure whether or not this stuff is working. But over the year, we're actually we're in sprint 51 now. We do 1 week sprints. So we're approaching 1 year of sprinting. And our process looks just completely different than it did 1 year ago.
So I think this is really, really cool story to tell here with it. So from the perspective of, we'll generically call you the product owner here, like, can you elaborate a little bit more on, like, because I think a really common question is what makes a successful Scrum Master? And I think this is an interesting story to tell from the perspective of a product owner. Here are the things that a great Scrum Master is doing for me. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Sure. Let me just think of some examples here. One of the hardest changes to convince me of is we've always done 1 week sprints, and that's actually the thing that he hasn't convinced me of yet. I think the whole team would prefer 2 week sprints because there's something about it that feels better to them, or it's less rushed to them, or something like that. So we still do 1 week sprints. We're a startup. We don't have product market fit. We have less than 500 users. Like, we are going to iterate as often as possible, and I don't think you can change my mind on that. But one really interesting thing that the Scrum Master brought to me was we have a schedule now where on Tuesdays we have standing meetings in the morning to do refinement and or planning. On Wednesdays we have sprint reviews, and on Thursdays we have retrospectives. So we kind of have this set schedule that's out of order. Right, we do planning, review, retro. That's not typical. That is typical, unless I suppose I have to add this detail. We do planning for next sprint on Tuesday, then we do the sprint review for the prior sprint on Wednesday, and the retro for the prior sprint on Thursday. Sorry about that. That was really confusing. So we're actually, it feels like we're planning a week ahead or something like that. But for whatever reason, that schedule works for us. It allows us to ask a lot of good questions on Tuesday mornings that we can bring to the sprint review on Wednesday and ask our stakeholders what they think. Like, hey, we just planned out the next couple of PBIs. Here's some trade-offs that we're seeing. What do you think we should do? And it also, the actual genesis of this was meeting control. Now the dev team's schedule is that on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursday mornings, there can be meetings. And at no other time are there meetings. So we went from early on kind of having sporadic meetings, just, we got to figure this thing out, so put a meeting on the calendar. We got to figure this thing out. So like Thursday afternoon, we're going to get in a room and do refinement. And it was very interrupt driven, which isn't a bad thing, but it became chaotic for us. And I say it's not a bad thing because I think you should always default to like getting in a room and figuring something out as a team, even if you have to call it a meeting and people dread it, but you should default to that. But it was super chaotic for us, and it was happening too much. So the Scrum Master said, hey, this is the schedule that I think will work. We should try it for a couple of weeks and see what happens. And it was upon first glance, it was all sorts of wrong to me, right? It's like, well, what do you mean we're planning before we even do the review? That doesn't make any sense. It's not Scrum. All of the like Scrum trainer red flags went off in my head. But in effect, it's worked really, really well. And it's allowed the team to get way more done, or at least have the feeling that they're more productive because they're not interrupted by meetings all the time.
Yeah, I think when I first heard that, doing the events out of order, my first thought was, well, is there waste happening because you're planning stuff that you're not going to do? But if you're doing 1 week sprints and it's like, well, you're only delaying it a week, and so you don't lose the context, maybe it's not such a big issue for you because of that, because of the 1 week iterations.
Yeah, that's right. And, as we've grown the team, so we started with 4 or 5 people, we have about 10 now. And as we've grown the team, I've become the bottleneck. So I think unlike a lot of projects in big companies where they basically have the whole backlog refined, or like months and months of the backlog refined out because they've usually started with a lot of upfront work. It's the opposite here. One of our recurrent retrospective issues is that I haven't spent enough time with the backlog as a product owner, and things aren't refined out well enough, and the team doesn't see past a couple weeks. So with that being the context, doing planning a little bit early, while once in a while we might like have a miss on a PBI and we refined and planned it, and now we're delaying it for months. Most of the time it's like, well, it's either going to happen this sprint or next sprint. Like we have a very short horizon that we're running with, which it feels good sometimes, and it also feels bad sometimes because it is hard to say. It is hard to tell the team like, hey, we're in the middle end of October here. It's really hard to tell the team what they're going to work on past, say, November. Like I have no idea what's happening in December right now because we don't have enough time to refine out the backlog that far.
So do they know the vision though? But like they know the high level, like, hey, you have like a lean canvas or something out there that's like, this is where we're going. These are the problems we're solving. And like they can kind of start taking steps that way, so they're not like painting themselves into a corner, like architecturally or anything like that, right?
Yeah, that's for sure. Like otherwise, it would just be, I don't even know what the right word for it is. Like that doesn't even seem like good product management or good company management somehow. But like, yeah, we can say kind of big feature areas. Like we know that we're working on EHR integration. We know that we're working on this thing called Pathways framework. And we know some key events that are coming. We know when sales has demos scheduled, and we know when marketing has some PR and press events scheduled, and things that are tied to that. So we know like the big moving blocks, but it's really like down to the refinement level. Like we're building something that's not a copy paste of anything out there. So like everything goes through the same kind of ideation and creation process. We have to have a lot of discussions about options and alternatives and the 50 ways that we could actually solve this problem. And that just takes time.
Yeah. So how are you like validating that stuff in the market? I know you're also the steward for the Scrum with UX course. And so I know you're like passionate about this. So I'm curious to see how you're applying that.
That's a good question. So I think the app has been out for about 4 months, and in the first month or two, we gave a download code to just friends and family, and most of our research and validation was just talking to pals, right? And that gave us one kind of feedback, which is really helpful for some like early things about like the logon process and things like that. But we're just in a position now where we're scheming about how we're going to get feedback from what we imagine our real like high value power users are going to be. And we just haven't taken that step yet, but let me give you a few examples of things we've done in the meantime. And I do actually mean to say like these are proxy things for actual real user validation. I think companies do this way too often, but we're just in a position with the type of product that we have that we kind of have to wait till we have a partnership deal with another business to be able to use like patients of a doctor that we have a partnership with as test subjects or something like that. this is not a consumer-facing application for the most part. So the things that we need to test are in conjunction with a healthcare facility. So that we have to do that, and you have to get after end users. But notwithstanding, some of the things that we're doing now to get more feedback is we run competitions in the app. So we offer $100 gift cards for going and using part of the app that we need feedback on. And kind of the last step of that is you have to fill out a quick SurveyMonkey survey. So that's a very broad, like shotgun approach for feedback. Anybody that's an app user can do it. And the $100 gift card is very cheap for us in order to get that level of feedback. I think we've run this for a couple of weeks, and I think we have like 20 people. It's been 2 weeks since we've started, and we have 20 people that have given feedback in the survey form already. So, $5 a feedback, right? It's super cheap to do that. The other thing that we're going to do later this month is we're going to have a guerrilla UX section. So I have a UX specialist here, and one of his he has a lot of moxie. And one of his favorite things to do is literally just go out on the street and ask people. And I find that frightening, like talking to strangers, showing a product that we've built to somebody who has no context whatsoever. Like I'm already feeling defensive inside, right? So I find this very frightening. But our UX specialist has a lot of moxie, and he loves doing this stuff. So we're planning a whole dev team event where we're gonna give the dev team a little training and have a couple practice sessions with each other about how to run these very, very short, like 3 to 5 minute user interviews with a stranger. And then we're gonna walk around. We're in downtown Milwaukee here, and we're just gonna walk around the streets and ask people to use our app. Have a very specific test script, testing a very specific feature, because these people aren't going to have any context. So I think you have to give way more direction than just putting your app in front of somebody and watching them use it. So you have to give some very specific direction, but it'll help us learn some things about specific features that we have questions about.
Is that going to be with like paper prototypes or real interactive software that they're going to be engaging with?
No, yeah, with the app itself. So with the production app, and we'll just set it up to, I think we have 2 or 3 ideas right now of like, where should this menu option go, or asking somebody to find a specific feature in the app that we think is obvious, but maybe people have navigation troubles, or people seeing it for the first time won't find it so obvious. So some of those core assumptions are really nice to test with random people on the street, especially when it doesn't have anything to do with some like deep domain expertise, right? Like we're going to test things like navigation of the app, finding features, whether the button should be at the top or the bottom of the screen, stuff like that. It's just anybody can do that, and it's a real easy way to get validation on some of that. Because inside our office here, like we work with the app every day. We think it's perfectly intuitive and completely navigable, and I know how to find anything I need to find in the app, but we are way too close to it.
That echo chamber.
Yeah, we even see it in sprint reviews, right? When people from marketing and other stakeholders in the company come and see the app, even just once a week, there's all sorts of things that people are surprised with. They're like, hey, that doesn't seem like how you've done all of these buttons in the past. Like, what is that about?
So what do those sprint reviews look like? Being such a small company, I mean, are you able to get customer involvement in there, or I guess just paint a picture?
Yeah, we don't have customers like end users in our sprint review, although a lot of us are end users and our families are end users. So we don't have customers in the sprint review, but we do have most of the company. So the way that we do this is every Wednesday, we kind of have a smaller group of stakeholders come for the sprint review. And then once a month on a Wednesday, it's the whole company. So everybody comes and sees kind of the month over month changes in the product. And the reason that we do that is we started with the whole company at every sprint review. We grew a little bit. We have 21 employees now, I think. So we grew a little bit, and having everybody in one sprint review was too much. It took too long. Not everybody was interested. Every week, right? It was every week. It was just too much. So now we've shifted where every week we kind of do a deep dive on the features that we have complete and talk about other trade-offs that we have to make. And then once a month, that sprint review is more like a product overview. Like, here's how the product's evolved in the last month. Let's make sure everybody's on the same page. We know what's in the app stores now. We can start talking about it. We can start writing marketing articles about it, stuff like that. And that seems to work pretty well so far. I would see the Scrum guy in me still says, like, well, no, we do weekly sprints. We should have a weekly sprint review and everybody should be there. And we did that and it didn't work for us. So we changed it and this seems to be working better right now.
Yeah. And I think that works, right? Like, you have a very mature group of stakeholders even, right? Like, they understand Scrum. They're not in the beginning level, of the shoe level of understanding of anything in the Agile realm. So, like, saying, yeah, this doesn't work and we think this is better, I think that's fine as long as you're experimenting with it and you have, something to validate that, yeah, this is better for us. I'm actually working with a company right now, and that's the conversation we're actually having. Is right now we're in sprint 4 of 2 greenfield products we're building, and the whole company pretty much is coming to the sprint reviews. And it's like, do we need everyone there? Like, they're not really all aligned. Like, we're still figuring out that product market fit, where things actually go, and is there too much spin happening because we have so many people in the room? And it's like, we just need this core people to get focused on it. Maybe show them where we're going and what we're doing every month instead of every 2 weeks might be a better thing. So I think we're on the path to where you're going too. Inside me, like, I was like, well, no, you want everyone there, but like, maybe there's a time for that once you get past the certain maturity level, similar to what you're doing. Like, maybe when you get to the point where, like, you're releasing every sprint and you've got, a couple thousand users using it, like, then it makes sense to keep everybody in sync because there is so much changing. And so, user feedback's happening all the time, and you just need to keep that rate of change happening, and you need all that feedback.
Yeah. The other angle to this is that I think unlike a lot of the people that we work with that come from big companies that are maybe just starting to adopt Scrum and starting to figure out some of these technical practices, we had the luxury of starting with a clean slate and with a senior team. So from sprint 1, we had a very robust definition of done. And by sprint 10, that definition of done included ship to production, flag on for customers. So we do dozens of production deploys a week, and we do 1 deploy to the App Store a week. There's just overhead in the App Store. Otherwise, we would do it every time we push something to production. So we're lucky in the sense that when we push stuff out to production, we do it all the time, and we do it regardless of the sprint review cadence. But we're lucky in the sense that we're so confident that what we put out into production is done, working, bug-free, that, like, so we don't have to be concerned about that to the extent that I think a lot of other folks have to be, are maybe constantly worried about whether or not they've really nailed quality. And then the sprint review helps with that, right? You want to get everybody together. You want to demo this thing in front of a big group of people and really make sure that it's done and ready before you press ship. But if you can reverse that and you can always be sure that things are done and ready and you can always ship to production, you're never worried about it, then the cadence of the sprint review becomes less important. Who attends the sprint review becomes less important because you're not really using it as a quality gate anymore.
So if you don't mind, I want to jump back to, you were talking about the guerrilla user experience that, going out and doing that. Talked a little bit about you being the steward for the PSU. And so I'm curious, like, how did that even come about? Because talking with Gary, I know he's super passionate about it, and cool. How did you get involved with it?
Yeah. So the PSU is the Professional Scrum with UX class. And the way that I've thought about it is kind of like this. Hey, it's 2019 right now, but let's imagine that it was 20 years ago in 1999, and we were all Scrum trainers, and we were thinking about how to make Scrum better. 20 years ago, we might have written a class called like Professional Scrum with testing or with quality assurance or something like that, because we were seeing this huge gap between development and test. And those were typically separate teams, separate functions. Work had to be handed off back and forth, and it caused all of these problems. Well, in the 2000s, we solved that. We now have. I like that I just pronounced that we solved all of dev test problems. But the majority of teams now have a very tight coupling between code and quality, and sometimes it's because they have people on the team with different skill sets. Sometimes it's because they've grown T-shaped people with skills in both areas. But we've kind of made it work, and it's a known way of working now that dev and test have to be really, really tightly coupled. In 2019, that's not true with UX. For whatever reason, UX came about and kind of rose to prominence very quickly. And like when Jeff and Josh wrote the Lean UX book, it really things really took off in the UX world, and we still to this day in some of the organizations that I work with that I consider very, very, very mature, they still have completely separate UX departments, and that's weird to us, thinking about getting all of the skills on the team and eliminating handoffs and things like that. It's weird to have this whole function be completely separate from the dev team. And there's good reasons for it too. Like there's kind of pros and cons on both sides. And one of the most interesting parts of developing this course and working with some UX professionals like Josh Seaton and Jeff Godoff was they have some stories to tell us about some ways that dev teams and agile coaches were not so kind to UX folks. And we have some stories to tell about how sometimes the UX folks kind of hold this design thing over our heads and think that, they're the most important part of the entire product process. So like this has just happened in companies where there's a little bit of headbutting going on, and they're wholly separate teams, wholly separate functions, and we have to find a way to integrate them together. That was a long backstory to just tell the shorter story of the course, which is that after 1 hour of me and Gary, professional Scrum trainers, and Jeff and Josh, the authors of Lean UX, after 1 hour of chatting about what it looks like to integrate UX and Scrum, we were 99% aligned. It's so obvious to people who have seen this done well how it should work. It's so obvious to people that have seen this done well that there can't be a separate design phase. There can't be staggered design and development sprints the same way there can't be staggered development and test sprints. The parallels here were so obvious between dev test and design and dev that the course, at least philosophically, the course was created very quickly. And then the rest of it was just creating slides, which takes forever. but we were on the same page almost immediately because we had all seen this work really well in small pockets. But it's not the norm right now, right? It's just most companies have this separate UX department, separate UX process, separate design process. Like completely different people are involved, and then they do a gigantic handoff over to development and delivery. So the UX course, the PSU aims to show how design can be constant, how it can be iterative, how designers and coders and testers and DevOps professionals and Scrum Masters and product owners can all work in a cross-functional team together and get things done together, while still respecting some of the longer running types of work that the UX folks often do. It's just a fact, unlike coding, I think, it's just a fact that some of the things that UX people do require an amount of calendar time that's absolutely appropriate for what they're asking. If you want to see how somebody uses the TurboTax software over the course of an entire tax year, you're running a 1-year experiment by definition, right? You can't do that in a 2-week sprint. You're doing a 1 week or 1 year piece of work. journal study or something like that. So we have to do all of these other things the same way that we do sometimes with architecture or testing or something like that. Like sometimes we have to take a step back and say, hey, you know what, we are just gonna this one feature or this one test is just going to take a long time to run, and it's totally worth it. We should do it. There's things in the UX world like that, and for whatever reason, we started the Scrum discussion with the UX folks with a whole lot of headbutting, and hopefully we've worked through a lot of that now.
Yeah, and when I get into that same conversation with people, I just say, well, that's just refinement. It's no different than
Exactly.
we need to figure out what user metrics we need to validate against to drive certain behaviors. And we're going to do a bunch of, data mining to figure that out. If we have, like high-end analytics in our product, it's no different than doing that for months, maybe before you actually start something and you're working on this feature. It's very, very similar. And like, that's the kind of stuff Amazon does all the time, or other, LinkedIn or other big companies like that have all this data. They're spending many, many weeks looking at the data, figuring out how they want to change the data, or what features they could add and what experiments they could run to manipulate the data to get the, end results that they're looking for in the business. And I see that as the very same concept.
Yeah, effectively setting time aside at the beginning to actually figure out what success looks like, and then backwards planning from that. If this is what success looks like with these types of metrics, what are the things that we can actually do to implement to influence or change those types of metrics? I feel like that, man, what is it? Shoot, I always mess up. Jeff always gives me crap because generally I remember this quote. But if you're running an experiment just to see what happens, you're always going to be successful at seeing what happens, right?
Yeah.
In order for it to be a proper test, you have to know what you're actually trying to influence and change.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Can I fast forward a little?
Yeah.
I think that we're at the point with UX and Scrum that I start to wonder about like what's next. I see most other functions kind of working well within the Scrum framework. UX, I think, to me is kind of like the final frontier because it was so separate. It still is so separate at a lot of companies. I wonder what you guys think is next. Like, what do you think is the next skill or function or something that Scrum really doesn't have figured out yet?
So I think one that a lot of big organizations are battling with right now is, you could call it DevOps, you could call it operations, you could call it infrastructure, but there's a balance of where do you put that on the team or not, and especially the size of the organization, and do you centralize, decentralize some of those things? I think that's a topic where the answer is not always clear, and so I think that's one area. How about you, Jeff?
I was thinking not necessarily a skill set or a role specialization, but really, and we were just kind of talking about this, but metrics, like truly validating the things that we're delivering. I think because Scrum is an outcome-based framework, I like to say, but that kind of get lost in the weeds when there's so much focus around a product backlog and it's just filled with shit, right? It's just this laundry list of things that we want to get done, and we've forgotten the whole reason we're doing these things is to have an outcome with a user, outcome with a customer. And I think we're starting to see a resurgence now around, we actually want to achieve outcomes with these changes we're doing, but how do we actually validate them in a marketplace? How do we validate that the thing we did actually achieved a result for us? We were talking about Amazon. You brought up Intuit. I think there are these, probably a lot of really good companies out there that are doing it today, but I think other standard organizations are really just now starting to figure out like, agility wasn't about just getting stuff done. It was about getting the right stuff done, and how do we validate the stuff that we're getting out there?
Yeah, that's a tough trade-off too, especially at a startup like this. Like the rush is on to get something out there, right? Like, man, what a luxury it would be to be able to take a breath and ask, is this the right stuff or not? And in a lot of ways, like that's core to what the job of a startup is. But the day-to-day feels much more like, okay, let's get something done. Let's get something out there. We'll get feedback on it one way or another. And that's a trap that I think a lot of companies fall into, startups especially. you have to define what you're looking for, and you have to actively go test it. Otherwise, what are you doing?
Yeah, it's probably really easy in a startup to get emotionally involved with whatever you're building because it's your baby. Where like in a large organization, you might know what the right answer is, or you want to try this experiment, but you can't get through the different layers of bureaucracy to actually run the experiment. So
That's right.
two different battles to fight, I guess. But one's an internal, one's an external battle, and maybe the internal one's easier because you have more control over that.
Yeah, interesting.
So what were you thinking though, Erik?
I don't know. Like UX was the one that I thought was kind of the final frontier. I don't have vision as to what I think is next. So yeah, I don't know.
I was curious, having worked in larger organizations, like what really draws you to the startup culture? Like you talked earlier about risk and rewards going on inside of there, but like, and maybe it's not so much like I still care about that question, but like what do you find most powerful about working in the startup culture versus
Yeah. I think that there's two things. One is not for me personally, but something that I've noticed when you're working in a team that actually ships every day. It's insanely fun. And I'm not really part of that shipping process, but something that I think most people that work here and work at a startup or work at a very high performance team at a big company, one of their driving factors is like they're actually able to get something done every day. It's not full of meetings and bureaucracy and like, yeah, I have this thing done, but then it has to go to an architectural review board in 4 months before it ever sees the light of production. Having the autonomy to actually go from idea to production is insanely fun and very engaging. So I think you can create that anywhere. It doesn't have to be a startup. It's a choice you make on how much autonomy and authority you give to your teams and how much process you mandate is on top of them and around them. It's a choice that you're making. You create that anywhere, not just a startup. But the other thing for me is the ability to actually make those choices. So we've all struggled working at big clients as in a consultative manner where it's like, hey man, there's a better way to do this. Here's an idea. Why don't we try it? And it kind of dies on the floor right there. The idea of a big multinational company changing the way they do the annual performance reviews is untenable. Like it's a non-starter in 99% of places. But when you work for a startup, all of that stuff is on the table. And I think there's two things that kind of drives it. One is like, well, we're building a new company. There's no reason to repeat all of the mistakes of the past. Like, let's dream up of a new way. Let's see what other new modern agile companies are doing and mimic them, or let's come up with our own way of doing things. And then the other reason for this is like, you have to figure this stuff out in real time. Right. You don't, just because you filed the paperwork for a company doesn't mean that you have an HR system in place. Doesn't mean how you're going to do marketing or team meetings or anything like that. Like, you get to create all of this, and you have to in real time. Otherwise, you're just going to work at one of those chaotic startups where everything is just a mess. Right. Mm-hmm. So like having reasonable discussions about how to structure things at a company is exciting to me, because all of those choices that we make early on in a company reflect the way that the company behaves as we grow and we scale. It reflects the processes that we put in place, and therefore it reflects our culture, right? Because these decisions that you make are putting ways of behaving in place. They're creating norms and standards of how people have to act within your company, and that creates culture. So every little decision early on is important, and I love stressing out over that.
So they are important, right? But you can't not decide and can't move forward, right? Like when we used to work together, we would have this thing where we would just debate, right, constantly about stuff with our group, because we were all very opinionated. But you have to, at a certain point, just make a decision and say, we're going to try this for a little bit, and then we'll adjust. So how do you balance that? Because you have a big group of people that are very, they're very mature. They've got a lot of probably opinions and experiences, and they probably don't agree all the time. So how do you handle that?
I I don't know, honestly. I haven't been involved in a lot of the team's decision making when it comes to things that they don't agree about. Um, I tend to let them handle. I tend to let them come to their own decisions without a lot of me influencing it. And I'm talking specifically around like the big decisions, the big opinions that people have here have mostly been around technical choices, not product choices or process choices. And like honestly, the way that they've solved it is, and it's kind of an inside joke here, is people take walks around the block. It's like if you can't solve this in 5 minutes in this discussion here, like go take a walk and have it out on the streets about which JavaScript framework we should use or how we should architect this one feature, stuff like that. And people do it. They'll say, okay, well, if anybody's interested, we're going to make this decision today, and we're going to do it by walking around the block. And they'll go take a walk and they'll hash it out and come back and say, okay, well, I still disagree with this, but now I understand why we're going to make this decision, and we move on. I want to fast forward again,
Okay.
To finish off the conversation that we started with, which is hiring. We talked a little bit about how we hired that first team with kind of joint interviews, and I want to talk a little bit about how we've continued to scale and how we've moved our interview process to after we had that core team. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. So after that initial core team, we can't take that amount of time to interview people anymore. Like we took a good 6 weeks to find that first team. And that'd be disastrous if we took six weeks to find people. So the way that we interview now is I usually have a call with everybody just for 10 or 15 minutes, and it's pitching them. It's what is HealthChampion about? What are we doing? Why is this a fun place to work? And what are we looking for? And then I actually leave it up to the candidate to choose whether or not they want to continue. So that first call, I think, sets a few important things in place for us. One is that the first thing that a candidate is hearing is the vision of the company, not the requirements of the job, not the 4-page job description. The first thing they're hearing about is the vision of the company, and they have to be excited enough about that to opt in, right? So this isn't like me deciding whether or not you can come interview here. It's the candidate deciding, like, if this is interesting to you, then come and interview. So that opt-in puts a lot of, in my opinion, it puts a lot of power and like positive psychology in the hands of the candidate. Like, they're in it now, right? They've said, yes, I want to do this. I'm going to commit to this interview process. And I have no data on this, but I'll say without data that I think that probably helps the last mile of the interview process, where it's like, if we give somebody an offer, they say yes because they were in it and they chose to be in it, but from the beginning, right? They're not just interviewing in 1,000 places and fishing for job offers or something like that. Like they have to want it. So that's the first part. And then the second part is just a standard, like, half an hour technical interview with somebody on the team that's technical, just to see if there's a skills match or mismatch. And we can usually get that from the resume, but not always. So we give at least a little time to make sure that there's a skills match or mismatch. And if there's a mismatch, we just end the process there and say, hey, look, these just aren't the right skills. If we ever need something like this, we'll give you a call, but this isn't right for us right now. But if there is a match, then we actually invite them in for a full day. And I think this is the really important part that I don't see a lot of companies doing. We actually invite them in for a full day. We pay them for the day, right? They have to take a day off work. We pay them for the day, and they sit down and work with the team. So we choose a little bit, like, we kind of cherry pick the PBIs or the features that we're working on for that one day, so that they're getting something that's doable in a day. And that they're getting something that will allow them to show off the skills that we need to see in that day. But it's also pretty much in order of the backlog, right? So, like, the team might be jumping down a couple weeks to find the perfect feature to work on, but they're also, like, completing that feature. So one of the things that I really like about this with my, like, investor hat on is you're not, like, huge air quotes here, you're not wasting time interviewing, because 99% of our interview process is creating features, right? We're just doing it with an interviewee. So we pay them for that day. They come in and work with the team. It starts with the stand up in the morning. They go and pair with a developer or with a tester for a couple hours. And by the end of the day, they've shipped something to production. And that's it. That's our entire interview process. If somebody can ship something to production with the help of the existing team here on our existing product, then they're more than qualified to come work with us, because guess what? That's what we do every day. So there's not a long drawn out process. It's just that first intro call, small tech screen, and then a 1 day, 4, 5, 6 hour kind of a process that we pay them for. And then the team makes a decision right after that. Like usually that day, like that night, they'll get an offer letter.
That's awesome. I really love that, because there's so many things that can be hidden or not come out in a conversation that you have for a couple hours with somebody. And then you make a big investment, sometimes it's even, it's 6-figure investment on somebody for a year. And it was based off a couple hour conversation on a phone instead of actually seeing what they can actually do. And some people are really good at conveying what they can do and oversell themselves. And some people way undersell themselves. So you maybe don't give them the chance. So let's, see what actually happens and see how we work together. And you're really protecting your culture by, by actually like giving the team that choice and like experimenting with that before they actually have to make the decision. So I think that's an amazing way to do hiring.
Yeah, it's worked out for us pretty well so far. We haven't had anybody join that the team felt like we got something that we didn't think we saw in the interview. And we haven't had anybody join and then leave right away for any reason. So it's worked out pretty well so far.
So you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, but like, have you had to fire anybody then because of using this practice?
No, we haven't done that at all. Here, we've also only been in existence for a year, and we started with a very senior team, so wouldn't have expected to have to fire anybody. But yeah, I haven't. Maybe another interesting tidbit here is we're a startup, and when you get hired here, you get an offer package that has benefits and salary and equity and things like that. And we actually let the candidate choose what level of salary and equity they want.
Oh, nice.
It's not an unbounded scale, because otherwise people would say, a couple $1 million and all of the equity.
Yeah.
But I usually just give them options. If you're willing to take a lower salary, that helps us. That helps a bootstrap startup out cash flow wise, and we will give you more equity in exchange for that. But I keep it. I give them a couple options and then let them decide. So again, I feel like putting that power in the hands of the candidate, the same way that they had to opt into the whole interview process in the first place, putting the power in the hands of the candidate gets them to buy into this in a way that you don't really get that if you're just given a white offer letter with words on it. And it's like, take it or leave it, or now, God forbid, I have to negotiate this. Right. That sounds horrible.
Yeah.
So instead, like, the negotiation is done maybe a little bit on the front end, where it's like, hey, this is kind of the range we're thinking of. This is kind of the range of salary, the range of equity. Where in there would make you say yes?
Yeah, I love that, because different people want different things, and you're customizing it for the individual, right? Like, we are all individuals, and it reminds me of this Gary Vaynerchuk video I saw the other day, where he's just like talking to some CEO, and he's like, how do I get people to be as motivated as I am about this product that we're developing? And he's like, they're not. They don't have the ownership that you do. Why would they be? He's like,
yeah.
How many people do you have in your company? Just go meet with each one of them. He was like, I don't know. I think it was like 20 or something. He's like, okay, 2 weeks, breakfast, lunch, meet with every single person and ask them what they want. Do they want more money? Do they want, more vacation time? Do they want more equity? What is it? And figure out how you make that work within your current budget and, the money you have, and then give them what they want. And then they'll have the engagement, because they're getting, out of this relationship what they need.
Yeah.
So I don't know, you're kind of doing that from the beginning without even, maybe even giving them a choice to say, the question is, it is kind of what you want. How do you want to be compensated?
Yeah.
But
yeah, I'm not going to.
They could choose other things later too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. I'm not going to choose what's important to you. I'm going to give you a constrained set of options that work for me. Any of these options work for me. I want you to choose something that'll make you say yes when you get an offer letter later tonight. And like, if for nothing else, the speed is value there, right? Like hiring people at a lot of big companies takes months and months and months and months. We have a lot of examples now where people interview on a Wednesday and they're starting 2 weeks later. Like it's as fast as the hiring process can be with like given standard 2-week notices and stuff like that. And that's important.
Yep. Especially in a startup, right? You got to move.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So I wanted to jump in and have you share this great story you have about working with an oil company in Azerbaijan. It was a pretty cool opportunity, and I love it when you tell this story. So maybe you could dive into that and give us some of the highlights from that story.
Sure. This is really interesting. I know nothing about oil and gas. I went and worked for 6 months for a gigantic oil company, and they were in Azerbaijan, which is just an amazing place. It's a country nestled on the Caspian Sea between Russia and Iran. They're very progressive, very safe. Whenever I tell people it's between Russia and Iran, I kind of get this reaction like, oh, ooh. But no, it's an amazing place, beautiful country, awesome people, great culture, awesome food. And they're very progressive. So when the Soviet Union broke up, they sold a lot of their oil rights in the Caspian Sea to big oil companies so that they could start creating their own country. And development there has been great over the past 20 years. So they have a bunch of oil platforms out in the sea. And it turns out that these things are super complicated. Like my naive view of drilling for oil was that you dug a hole and then oil came up and you captured it. And it turns out it's just slightly more complicated than that. It takes about 20 or 30 different experts in order to plan this whole operation, like PhD level scientists and engineers and experts to do everything from like the seismic and surveying to actually building the structures to actually dealing with the chemistry to getting it back on shore and dealing with piping and refinement and everything else like that. So they not atypically, the way that these big oil companies have designed their organizations is they have 20 or 30 different silos. And inside each silo, all of these experts live and they work on projects, and those projects get pushed across silos. So they started with kind of their mean time to delivery for a new well, which means they're going to go out to an existing oil platform. They're going to drill a new well and they're going to get oil from a new hole in the floor of the ocean. Their mean time to delivery was something like 18 months. So it took a long time to plan the well, design the well, do all of the testing in QA, get all of the seismic readings and all of that, plan for all of the safety features, order all of the steel, and then actually go out and drill and create the well and cap it off in a safe manner and then connect it up to the platform and start pumping oil. It took about 18 months. So they had tried Scrum for a little bit. And then when we went out there to help them, we had the opportunity to get a lot of these people all in the same room, all working on the same team. And instead of this project being passed off between different functional silos, it was just people sitting in the same room from all of these functional silos doing the work together. And that took that well planning and delivery time from like 18 months down to 6 to 8 weeks. So huge improvement in the time to delivery. But it didn't come. This is always the part of the story that I really like telling. It's not easy. Obviously, like doing this at any big company isn't easy. It also didn't work perfectly. So having 20 PhD level scientists, engineers, and experts in a room, all trying to work on designing and delivering a well, which is in some ways a waterfall project, right? Like you don't get to drill 40 wells and then find the one that works. You only get one shot at this. It costs hundreds of thousands of dollars a day to drill a well. You only get one shot at this. So people were bored, right? Like on the days that we were talking about, like the shape of the well or the flex of the steel or the chemistry of the mud we're going to have to use, all of the other people that were involved in seismic and other things, like they didn't know what was going on. Like they had appreciation for it, but it's not their specialty. They didn't feel like they needed to be there. But the proof is in the pudding, right? This is kind of the classic silo and project fallacy. That the proof is in the pudding here. The time to delivery shrank 80, 90%. And at that point, as a business, you shouldn't really care if people are fully utilized, right? If the customer is getting what they want sooner, I don't care if people are working 1 hour or 10 hours a day. It doesn't matter anymore.
And that's hard though in a big company, right? To shift that mindset.
Yeah.
Especially with PhDs, like I'm going to let this PhD sit there and like just listen to this conversation and not do any work today.
Right?
Really?
Yeah. So we evolved it pretty fast. Where the way that we worked it was kind of every morning we would be in the room and we'd work on things together that everybody needed to hear. Sometimes it was just pure status update. Not going to lie, we hate to hear that in Scrum, but like keeping all of the 1,000 people or so that are involved in drilling the well, and dozens of vendors and stuff like that, keeping everybody on the same page just required some time to talk status. And then other times it was working on things that we could all participate in, or like the hot topic of the day, or the thing that we got feedback on from the last sprint review that people didn't agree with or wanted a second pair of eyes on. We would work together in the mornings. And then in the afternoons, we would go back to where everybody sat. So the guy in charge of drilling could go back and sit with all of his drilling buddies and talk over some of the things that we're thinking about as far as drilling techniques or what have you. He's still 100% dedicated to the project, but we kind of dispersed ourselves in the afternoon so that we had some individual time to do our specialty, to do our work. That's not so different from what we see in a software company either, right? Like you start the day with a daily scrum. You might have a couple of meetings where you're doing a design session or you're sketching some stuff out on the whiteboard. You might take a walk around the block to figure out what JavaScript framework you have to use. And then you come back and you kind of put on your headphones for a couple hours and you get some stuff done. That same kind of way of working that we expect in software, or that is more obvious in software, I think, it applies in other fields as well. They're not doing software, but like you still have to have some heads down time, right? It can't all be in a team room all day long, stuff like that. So
was the key takeaways that you got out of this? Like, here's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing you probably condensed backlogs from the different, silos that were across the 30 different areas.
Yeah, no, I mean, the project was, they were always kind of a product oriented company. It was drill this well.
Okay.
Right. So they were kind of right on in that fashion, but they would say, hey, go drill this well. And then they would spend over a year trying to push that paperwork across functional silos.
So it was really lower WIP, right? So,
yeah, it's collapsing the silo onto a cross-functional team,
yep,
and only doing one well at a time.
Yep.
Right. And that way it doesn't take 18 months to plan a well. It takes 6 to 8 weeks. And then you can get on to the next one and the next one and the next one. You start getting a team working really well together, and now they know how to operate, and they're a semi-long-lived, semi-static team that knows each other's quirks, and they know how to do this thing called drilling wells, and you just keep feeding them more and more work.
Sure. Yeah, you slow it down to go faster.
That's right.
Build up the cross-functional team skills, and then let the magic happen. It's actually pretty intuitive. It's like, what would you do if there's an emergency in your business, no matter what it was? You'd pull the people together, all the experts. You put them in one room and say, you have one thing to work on. Figure this one problem out. Right. So like, it's the same thing that you did, right?
Yeah. But funnily enough, like I don't think I'm allowed to say a lot of details, but while I was over there was an emergency. It was a super minor emergency, but like anything that registers a 1 out of 10 on a safety scale is an emergency in the oil and gas industry, right? Like they're on it immediately, the first sign of trouble. So there was this thing that happened, and guess what they did? This huge functional organization set up a war room, and they made a cross-functional team of 30 or 40 people, and they said, you are coming to this room every day, don't go to your desk until this thing's solved. And they solved it, of course, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think every company has stories like this. It's like when things go bad, we put tiger teams together, and we hop on this emergency with an incredible sense of focus. And then the agile coaches and us say, hey, why don't you just do that all the time?
Right.
Right. It works. Let's work like that. Maybe without the sense of stress and emergency surrounding us at all times. But let's form our teams like that.
Yep. Well, it's been awesome, Erik, having you on the podcast. As we kind of wrap this up, is there anything you want to plug? Any way that the listeners can connect to you? We can put stuff in the show notes as well, but like anything you want to
Yeah.
You want to plug here at the end?
The Startup Health Champion. We'd love to have you download our app and give us feedback. If you go to myhealthchampion.com, you can sign up for the email list, and we'll send you a link to download the app. And maybe we'll just put a link in the show notes too if you want to download it directly. I'm the person that responds to your feedback emails, so it's not a robot or an intern or anything like that. It's me, the product owner, as it should be. So I read everything that every user sends in and respond. So I'd love to get feedback from a community of folks that are listening to this.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
We'll make sure to put that out in the show notes. All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Yeah, have a wonderful weekend.
You too.
Thank you for listening to the Agile Wire. We are consistently inspecting and adapting ourselves. We would appreciate feedback at feedback@theagilewire.com or on iTunes, Spotify, or Google Play Store. See you next time.